Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of everyone else at the table. I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac, and while I'm the only one here for the intro, I won't be the only one in the episode because DM Mitch and I talked to longtime friend and amazing person, Michael Ross from the RPG Academy, who is doing a lot of interesting things. But just to let you know, we recorded this both in the past and the future, and that's just me throwing in a terrible joke about how this is going to be about adding time travel to your game and some rules to follow and some tips and tricks and things to check out. We're already there. No, I'm just kidding. So with that, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The plate meat's back on the menu, boys.
Today on the meet, we have a returning guest, someone who is a personal friend of the show and just of both of us. So we have Michael Ross from the RPG Academy. Other things are Farm to Fable, who has terrible guests like yours truly on it. So you should definitely skip every episode I'm on, but listen intently to every other one. Michael, thank you for coming back on to talk to us.
Yeah, welcome back.
I'm thrilled to be here. Absolute pleasure. And Neal, you are one of my favorite guests on Farm.
Okay.
Please give yourself more credit. You're an amazing guest.
Awesome. Yeah, it's always nice having returning guests. And Michael, you are one of the first that we've had on. And if you haven't listened to the show, at least I can say that your podcast was one of the best inspirations for what we started with the Dungeon Master's Block. So always gotta throw that out there. So obviously, the next question that we typically ask returning guests are, what have you been working on lately that you can tell us about? And I know that one of those things is something that is near and dear to our hearts, although unfortunately we won't be able to go this year, but it is happening, a Catacon. Tell our listeners more. It's coming up. Tell us about a Catacon.
Yeah, it's such a weird time. So a Catacon is the convention that was born out of the RPG Academy. That's where the name comes from. Everyone thinks it's Arcadicon, but it's not. It's a Catacon, like Academy. Yeah, it makes sense if you know it, but until then, it makes no sense. We missed in 2020 because of COVID concerns, and we decided to go ahead and do it in 2021, right when things were looking better. Like the vaccine rollout was happening, the numbers were going down. It looked like things started opening back up. It's like, okay, well, great, we're on board. We're going to do it. Unfortunately, the numbers have turned and it's starting to look kind of bad again. But I'm committed. Like, I've already paid deposits. I'm going to be there even if I'm the only one else there. And I think we're still going to have a good turnout. It's just not going to be as big as it would have been. But we have the convention. It's in Dayton, Ohio in November. This year, it's the 5th, 6th, and 7th. It's a 3-day local convention. 2019, we had like 500 people. This year, we're expecting like maybe 300. So it's a pretty small event. You're going to see the same people all the time. You're going to make a Catacon friends. It's very RPG focused because of our podcast. That's kind of what we bring to the table and the people who listen to us who show up. But we obviously have board games. We're going to have vendors. We have people who are demoing games that they want to try to sell and, create, maybe go on to produce in the future. So it's everything that you would get from any other convention, but just tightened down into like a very small group of, again, this time about 300 people. But it's a great time. Again, both of you have come multiple times. I've played in games with you. You've played in games I've ran. It's a great little event that I've been told by multiple people. We kind of punch above our weight class when you think about the size of our event versus what we bring to the table and special guests and just the types of events that we offer. But this year it's a little scary because I don't know what it's going to look like and who all is actually going to show up when the rubber meets the road again. So like I said, I paid deposits, so I'm going to be there. It may just be you and me talking, but I'll do my best to make that a fun time if you, listener person, are the person who shows up and plays games with me in November.
I mean, that intimacy aspect that you're talking about has always been one of the things that I've loved about a Catacon and has made me want to go every single year, including this year. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work because I just, you're right. Like it's always been a special time with a special group of people. And I've every year walked away with someone that I've said they're my good friend now.
Right.
I mean, literally a Catacon was the place that I mentioned it very few times on the show, but like my job is to be a pastor. Literally, a catacomb was the place that I met the first people that I officiated a wedding for, which was an awesome thing. And obviously, we're close friends. So I think that most people will have that experience if they head to a catacomb. They will walk away not just having played some great games, but having made some good friends as well.
Yeah. Our tagline is a catacomb: gaming with friends, old and new. Because
Yeah.
you're going to be friends with the people you play with, whether you start off that way or not. That's my guarantee. Asterisk, not guaranteed.
So you might have said it already, but when is that? Where do people go to find more information on that? How do they get tickets?
Yep. So it's November 5th, 6th, and 7th in Dayton, Ohio at the Dayton Convention Center. You can go to acadecon.com. That's ACADECON.com. It'll have all the links and all the information. We're using tabletop events. If anyone goes to conventions, they're probably familiar with that site. It's amazing. And it's handling all the stuff as far as people wanting to get badges. They can see what events are being offered. So if you want to see if there's anything you would want to play before you drop your money to buy a badge, totally cool. You can do that. You can get your badge that way and then just show up and hang out with us Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in November.
Fantastic. And then are you working on anything else that you would like to tell us about?
Yeah, very quickly. My background, as both you two can see, I'm developing a game. Anyone who knows me, who's listened to our podcast, knows I've been an RPG enthusiast my entire life. I absolutely love them. They're probably the biggest hobby I have. If there's a second, it's movies. I absolutely love going to movies and talking about movies and analyzing movies. I had a short-lived podcast about movies. It was terrible, but it was fun with my childhood best friends who I talk about on the podcast a lot because it was Brandon, who's the person who got me to play D&D when we were like 12 years old. And so I've taken those two loves and mixed them together, and I'm creating a game called Action 12 Cinema, which is all about bad action movies, but not the bad action movies, the good bad ones, the ones that are fun to watch as long as you don't think about them too hard. It also features the D12, which I literally think is the best polyhedral. I'm the type of person who has a favorite die, and my favorite die is the D12. It doesn't get enough love in the world, so I built a game around just rolling a whole bunch of them.
Nice.
And the tagline is, B movie action, D12 dice. So if either of those things sort of appeal to you, then it might be something you'd be interested in. I've ran a bunch of play tests. I'm doing more this. Well, I don't know when this will come out. Within the next couple of weeks of today, I'm going to be at Sin City Con in Cincinnati. I'm running a bunch of demos there at Acadecon. I'm going to be running some of those there as well. And the goal, fingers crossed, is to have it out on Kickstarter middle of next year. I've hired a developmental editor who's helping me with the writing, with the rules, to make sure it's not just me. There's going to be a team of people, art directing, art, all kind of cool stuff. But I'm super, super excited about it. What I like to try to tell people is if you ever played in a game as a player where you make like that final attack on the monster and the DM says, okay, tell me what that looks like. And you get that little bit of moment where you get to have player narrative where you can describe your taking out this foe however you want. I've taken that and made the entire game out of it. So everything in my game is you just tell me how cool what you're doing is and what it looks like and how it feels. And so if that appeals to you, please, Action 12 Cinema, hopefully next year, 2022, on Kickstarter.
Michael, how long have you been working on this game for?
Off and on for probably about 3, maybe even 4 years now. It started as a joke. Like legitimately started with how can I just get a bunch of people to roll D12s? And once the jokey part kind of wore off, I'm like, there's actually kind of the bones of a fun game here, because at the end of the day, it's just rolling D12s and playing improv. You can kind of whittle down any RPG. It's rolling a D20 and improv, right? But mine's D12s, but it's very high improv. It's very high role play, storytelling inspired. And it's in some ways it's kind of hard to mess that up unless you're trying. And then I've just roped in all the movie stuff I love. So you roll for like tropes, like the bad guy stands up after you think they're defeated, or the worst weapon turns out to be the most powerful one, or train top battles or whatever. Everything you've watched in a bad action movie, you kind of roll and you add those elements together randomly and they create the game. And I know I've sort of already gotten derailed, but it's probably about 4 years, probably close to 5 by the time we actually get to Kickstarter.
Well, I could be wrong because I have a terrible, terrible memory, but I feel like you ran a game for which me and Neal were in of this the last time we were at Catacon.
I have ran some at a Catacon before. That sounds familiar to me, though the game is vastly different from that iteration, but at the heart, it's still the same. It's rolling D12s and telling stories about bad movie plots.
But I do have like a vague memory of it and it being a fantastic time. Again, I'm a very forgetful person, but what I will say is that just makes me more sad that I'm not coming this year, because it sounds amazing and I will for sure be backing that on Kickstarter when it comes out. And you, the listener, should be too.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to turn hard left for our surprise question then. And this one was brought to us by DM Jude. So if you could choose one philosophical concept, how would you implement it into your tabletop game?
Oh.
So for context, because I had to, I'm going to send over a list of philosophical concepts.
Okay, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna wrap it together. I'm gonna try to put on my DM hat here and see if I can make all this nonsense seem like it was all planned out from the beginning. So I want to choose absolute time and space, which I've not read, so I may be wrong about what it means, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to say what I think it means. And this goes back to sort of like the Doctor Who mentality, that there are some things that happen that are unchangeable. They are absolutes. So even if you have the ability to move through time and space, you can't change certain things. And if you were going to run a game about time travel, like an RPG of some sort, like perhaps we were to discuss this more in the future, that's something you need to decide about your rules. Are things changeable? Is everything changeable? Are there certain things that you can't change? And I think there's a lot of emotional weight that can be mined from having players realize there are some things they can change and some things they can't, and then butting up against that, which is again why time travel has been a genre that's been around forever, as far as I know, because the idea of you have the ability, you have the power to make change, but you still can't. And how do you deal with that? So if I was going to do a time travel story, I might consider using that as an element to see what kind of emotional weight I can wring out of my players in what they can change and what they can't.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Michael, for that answer. And of course, thank you, DM Jude, for that overwhelming question I hope to ask other people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Really putting people on the spot. What a great answer, though, because it brings us into our topic that I think we're all really excited to talk about. The concept of time travel in RPG games. And yes, we do speak mostly about fantasy type gaming. So this may take a very interesting turn, because you may be going, well, wow, that's like a sci-fi trope. Well, it can certainly be implemented into fantasy type gaming as well. And we can have some discussion in a more general sense as well. But so time travel in RPG games, honestly, just like that surprise question, I feel like to most people, this should seem like a pretty daunting thing if you are approaching as a DM, as a GM, and you're going, okay, we're going to do a time travel esque campaign. I mean, all I can think of right away is, wow, there's a lot of ways that could go wrong.
Yes.
This could be a complete like mess up. It's a little scary, to be honest. So time travel. Why? I think the thing is that we have to first ask ourselves is, why would you even consider doing a time travel type campaign? Or what would be the purpose of time travel in an adventure?
Well, for me, it's just fun. I love time travel. It's a type of story I've been drawn to, again, since I've been into media, books, TV shows, movies, whatever. I have used time travel a lot in my games. It's actually kind of a running joke in the RPG Academy, if you listen to our show regularly, that anytime there's a mystery in one of my games that doesn't make sense, you need to at least apply, well, could it be time travel? Because that is probably going to turn out to be the answer to the mystery if you can't figure out any other way. So I use it a lot. The very first actual play we ever did, Made Men, featured time travel a little bit at the end. I'm running a game right now. It's a 13th Age actual play. And one of the very first combats, the person that they're fighting says, you're not supposed to be here at this place at this time. And they still don't know, does that mean like, how did you get here, or time travel? They haven't got that far enough to know, but there's a really good chance it's going to end up being time travel. So I love time travel. I think it's fun. Again, for me, it's about the emotional weight. It's how do you learn about your characters through putting them through a situation where you're kind of viewing them from a different lens. I mean, I think Back to the Future is probably one of the most popular mass media time travel stories people might be familiar with. And, it's comedy, but it's also drama. And the whole point of those movies is for Marty to learn more about himself by seeing how his parents were and are and how the environment and their life affected them and how he can change that. So that's what you're doing to your characters as well. You're trying to figure out who they are by putting them in this unusual situation where, again, maybe they have or maybe they don't have the power to change things. And either way you go, that is going to tell you a lot about the characters. If they don't have the power to change it, but they rail against that, they're trying to change things, even though maybe the rules of the world said they can't, that tells us something. If they're all like, man, we can do whatever we want, it doesn't matter because, nothing we do matters here, tells us a lot about their character. So for me, character development, emotional role play juiciness is what I'm going for anytime I bring up time travel. Or it's because I've screwed up and I need to fix something, and that's how I'm explaining it.
Yeah. Well, and even like for me, that's like one of the most obvious purposes that it can serve in a story is the whether the characters have screwed up or weren't able to stop something. And so time travel as a device to be like, yeah, this catastrophe happened. And that can be like a number of things. That can be a catastrophe on a global, we are talking like apocalyptic, crazy big themed campaign, or it can be something that is catastrophic to the characters or even character. And so the only way to fix it is, well, we need to go back in time and see if we can fix it, which therein lies that, like, we don't need to talk about this quite yet, but like that whole concept that you were talking about, Michael, of like, but are certain things absolutes? And even if it's not a complete absolute, maybe it doesn't easily change. Maybe there's this long rabbit hole that you have to go down to be able to change that thing, that butterfly effect that we talk about. Like, you might even cause other problems because of traveling back in time. But certainly something needs to change because there was this catastrophe, this tragedy, and your characters feel a sense that we need to go back. And if they're given that opportunity, then of course they're going to take it.
Right. And I think that's, again, the very classic, probably the one that comes top of mind first. But there's a lot of different ways that you can use time travel. One of the campaigns I started, unfortunately it died on the vine like so many do, is I had developed the characters, they lived in the world together for a while. They were good friends in the campaign, and they were just, low-level adventurers. And then about the 5th or 6th session, they ended up getting transported well into the future, and they came to a place where we turned out that they themselves sort of took over, become like monarchs, then went to war with each other and decimated the land. But
oh my gosh,
they were all
amazing.
friends when they had time travel. So the point of that campaign was to figure out what had happened to them to cause their friendship to fracture, to cause this horrible thing. But they're not trying to fix it in the past. They're trying to deal with it in the future. And so I was kind of like trying to apply the mystery on both sides. Like, how did this happen? But how do we fix it at the same time? Unfortunately, it died before we ever got to like what I thought was a really juicy part. But that's another way to use time travel, is to just take the characters far in the future, maybe so far that like they don't know any concept of who's around. So it could be like one generation, and now their children are adults and they're living in that world, or so far in the past they're dealing with their grandparents, or it could be 1,000 years in the past before the continent was kind of the kingdom was formed or whatever. So you can do a lot of different things with time travel.
The character creation night to that type of campaign, I think, would be so fascinating, because you'd sit down with those players and say, like, you'd be working through their flaws and say, what's an unhealthy desire that your character has, and how could that manifest in like a problematic way? And then you are taking that as the DM and going, because you're going to be this dictator far into the future, and how does that character become the villain of the campaign, and this other character become a villain? Like, I love that. I love that idea. It might have died on the vine for you, but my hope is now there are many listeners who have listened, and that there are some campaigns that start because of that idea.
I would love that. Again, if you're playing 5e, which again, it could be any game, but characters have flaws. So literally on the sheet, it says like, this is my flaw. Just sort of take that to the nth degree.
Yeah.
What is the worst manifestation of that? If you're going to send people to the past when you're doing character generation, ask a little bit about the history. Like let's create your family tree 2 generations back just to get it. You can either try to sell it like this is not anything important and then make it important, or you can be very open, like, hey, this is going to be a time travel story. Your great grandparents might be NPCs. Your great great grandchildren might be NPCs. So let's take some time and build this family tree out so that when I introduce these characters, you already know who they are as a player, and maybe as a character again if it's in the past. Again, I love talking about time travel. I can talk about it forever. I know we don't have that much time. But I think for me, the big thing you want to start with, if I'm trying to give like help to someone who's thinking about doing this, is you need to decide right away that because the rules don't matter unless they matter. And that's up to you as the DM. But I think the one rule you have to establish is, can characters change things or not? So like, Back to the Future, yes, Marty was able to change things. He was actually able, in his regard, change them for the better. In some stories, you can't. And even if you do change them, time has a way of sort of fixing itself. So let's say you go back in time and you stop some tragic event from happening, like the Titanic. You cause the Titanic not to sink. You come back to the future and you find out there was another tragedy somewhere else in the world and roughly the same number of people perished. So this is time saying, okay, you can stop that, but in the flow of time, there needed to be a tragedy that day for some reason that's, interminable. So you kind of got 3 options. Yes, you can change. No, you can't change, or you can kind of change. But the outcomes will be similar. That's the thing that I think you have to decide before you start messing around with time travel. That's, to me, the one rule that you have to establish and then not break.
I think no matter what your rules are, don't break them. They can be the dumbest time travel rules, but as long as you stick to them, it's okay. Like that's really, because that's where you start to get into a lot of issues, especially we all have the player that like you're having issues with rules just that are written by Wizards of the Coast. And then the idea of like you establish time travel rules, it's difficult to continue the story if you're constantly fighting against their interpretation of the rules and your implementation of them. I would almost say don't make rules until you need them. Like it's like you said, until it matters, it doesn't matter. But then trying to stick to whatever rules you establish. Because at the end of it, I realize one of the ways that you use time travel, it could be as the story. That's the whole story. It's not part of the story. It's that you woke up 300 years later or 300 years in the past. So like you really want to be mindful of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love time travel stories. And I love the idea of time travel in a game. But it's daunting because I also recognize, as much as I love time travel stories, most time travel movies that I've watched, or TV shows, I walk away with a bad taste in my mouth because they establish rules early on for their movie universe. And almost every time I watch something that's about time travel, they break it within the movie. And it's like you completely just forgot or didn't care or didn't know a way out of this situation.
Right.
So you ignored the rule that you established in the beginning, and that breaks this whole thing down. And that always drives me insane. There are some great time travel movies out there, but like so many break their own rules. And so, yeah, you kind of have to be careful. If a rule is broken in your campaign, and we all know, we're all DMs. We could tell you we've made millions of mistakes. So like you're probably going to make mistakes. We're not trying to say like, don't enter into this because you'll probably make mistakes and you don't want to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But like, if you can establish those rules in your mind, whether they're said to the players or not, and if they are said to the players, if a rule gets broken, what you want it to be is you want it to be because you in your mind are going, because even though people think that rule is that way, it actually isn't. So when that rule gets broken, all of your players look at each other and they're like, wait a second, that's not how this works. And rather than being like, oh man, I messed up, you want it to be like, yes, interesting, you're right. As far as what you know, that is not how this works. This should be strange.
Exactly. I talk about it all the time when I talk about DMing. Like my biggest tip is when you realize you've messed up, is you just lean in and smile and go, that is weird, isn't it?
If you do mess up, just go that route.
Yeah. And then you just try to figure out why it does actually make sense before next time. And, it's the same thing here. If you establish a rule, but you break it, work it into the story. Unless you tell the players, oh, I've screwed up, which is fine. Maybe you do say, oh, actually, you're right. We got to rewind 5 seconds.
Can we time travel in above table for a second?
Right, exactly. We're going to rewind that. or you just try to figure out a way to make sense. Again, you're dealing with epic fantasy or sci-fi where time travel, it only exists one way in a consistent speed. We all move forward in time together at the same speed. As far as I know, no one's ever figured out a way to do it differently. So the idea of time travel itself is nonsensical. It's fantasy. So whatever rules you make up are just kind of arbitrary. There are no actual rules to it, right? So it could just be like you said, like that's what people believe. It's believed that you cannot change certain things. But then if a player does, maybe that's the point of the campaign, is them believing that they can or trying even though they know they can't. But the reward is, well, everyone was wrong. Turns out you can, but A, B, or C has to be in, or, E, F, and G has to be in place. And, now that you've done this, something else has to happen again. That sort of, okay, you've stopped this tragedy, but there's going to be another one. How do you deal with that? And I know there's shows that have dealt with that, is that, okay, you saved your loved one from dying, but your best friend's loved one now dies, or maybe someone you don't even know, but there's emotion to be wrung from that. And that's what I like to explore in those types of stories.
Yeah, we're kind of already deep in talks about like time travel rules. So let's just kind of keep going with that. As you said, Michael, we could talk about this for a long time. There are all these different rules that different universes and stories have like established with time travel. But there are some common ones that like seem to always come up. Like there seems to be so many time travel stories where there's a rule about like, do not let yourself from the past see yourself as you're traveling back, because if you do, either both of you will not exist, or like bad things will happen, like it'll send out a ripple. Like what are your thoughts about that type of concept within a time travel campaign?
Well, again, I think for any show like that, they're setting up the rules so that they can use those rules for dramatic effect, or in some cases comedic effect. So the same thing for DMs. If you're setting up the rules, make the rules the way you want them to be because you plan on using them. If you can't run into yourself, then your time travel story should not involve you going to a different part of the planet or universe, or so far in the future or so far in the past that you can't run into each other. Otherwise, that rule makes no sense. It's not interesting or fun. So if your rule is you can't run into yourself, then you need to take your time travel story one day in the past or one day in the future and run in the same place.
There needs to be stakes, yeah.
Yeah, and you can even do the thing where you play the campaign for like 3 sessions, and then you go back to the start of the campaign, and now you're running parallel. And so that's the fun is, okay, well, I know our characters are here. And remember that when we were like trapped in that room and you just happened to find the key? Maybe we're the ones that put the key there. It's Bill and Ted logic. Just don't forget to go back and put the keys here. And so now you've got to find a way to put the key where you need it without you seeing yourself do that, or everything falls apart. Like, so the rules are only there to make fun. And that fun can be drama, that fun can be comedy, that fun can be something, whatever you want it to be. So use the rules to set up a situation that you will then manipulate and use as a tool to make the game more fun, and however you see that happen.
Well, and I think that those rules can be even more fun when you are having the consequences of, if those rules are broken, be more mysterious. If we're talking about like time travel through the means of like perhaps your characters have like some catastrophe has happened, and so they need to go back in time and fix it, and they're told like you can't see yourself because they have gone on this long quest to, in order to be able to time travel back. If you're getting this from a spell book and you had to translate it, and so you have one of the characters, like you have them say something along the lines of like, guys, we cannot see ourselves in the past. Like that, there will be dire consequences. But then when another character asks like, what are those dire consequences? You might say, I don't know. It doesn't say anything, but it does say like, be sure not to. And so you know that something terrible will happen if that happens, but you don't know what. And the reason I find that to be more fun is a lot of times these rules might end up being broken. And when it does get broken, then there's a lot more freedom to decide, well, what is happening when this character runs into themselves in the past. Plus, I'll be honest, as a DM, I also want to see a scene where one of my players is role-playing future character and past character at the same time, interacting with each other and having that past character have their mind blown. And that would be so much fun to me.
Yeah, it would be a lot of fun. I kind of think about that almost like the the Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters rule of don't cross the streams. But at the end of the movie, that's how you solve everything. So sometimes the rules are meant literally to be broken.
Yeah.
And they're only there because we want them to be broken at the appropriate time and place so that it's dramatically, that's what I'm looking for. Not fulfilling, dramatically fulfilling.
Absolutely.
When it becomes a big thing. And the other thing I was thinking of is like, you're going to go back to movies. A lot of times we establish the danger of a scene with an NPC who gets taken out. Think of the beginning of the first Indiana Jones movie. Indiana Jones is going through the jungle and he's got two little helpers and neither one of them gets too far so that we can see how dangerous this thing is. So maybe that's what you need, a helpful little NPC. So maybe there's another character that goes with our characters through time. And in the first 5 minutes, they break a rule. So we get to see what happens when a rule is broken without losing a main character. And whatever rule that might be, whatever you want it to be dramatically appropriate, let the character see it. Let them see the effect of a character seeing themselves. Maybe they lose their mind. Maybe they literally just they can't deal with it and they become a husk of themselves. Or maybe they're evaporated from time. It's as if they never existed. You can be whatever you want it to be because you're making everything up anyways. But if you want the rules to seem important, show them being broken and show the consequences. If that's something you want to do. I know to your point, Mitch, by leaving them kind of loosey-goosey, that's also fun too. And I think either way could work. But if you're going to show them, that's a good way to do it through an NPC.
I think one of the other really good rules to establish is how easy or hard is time travel, because it could be, a lot of this conversation can be moved to the side if it's one and done. Because I've played a campaign where we could go back one time or not. That was the ultimate decision of that. But then that's it. And so a lot of questions can get answered by just saying no one else is being able to do this. So off we go. Or in the same as the direction forward. But then if it's everybody, everyone that's gone missing, then they're showing up at a later date. No one is ever truly missing. And I also think a lot of the Feywild stuff where it's just timey-wimey all over the place. And everybody theoretically could just mess this all up by just wandering into the Feywild for a minute or two or 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
Any other rules we want to explore?
One that in a book that I'm reading, I'm rereading the Dark Tower series. I don't know if either of you are familiar with that. Stephen King's magnum opus, as far as I'm concerned. And there's a huge element of time travel within that game. But there is a constant that in the prime world where they have to interact with occasionally, time always moves forward. It always moves forward at the same pace. So in some worlds, they can move backwards and forwards in time, but not on the prime plane. And on the prime plane, it's always moving forward. So there's some drama to be had from in this story where there's a date they need to get to. I think it's January or July 15th or something. And they keep checking in to see how close that prime world is to getting to that date. Because if they miss it, it's gone. No matter, even though they're time traveling, they cannot go back to that time once it's passed. So that's another rule you can consider, that if you are letting people jump around, I think there's that movie, The Tomorrow War, that recently came out on Amazon Prime with Chris Pratt, where you can move forward and backward in time, but it's within a 20-year gap that's always moving forward. So you can't go back to yesterday, but you can go forward 20 years in the past, and the 20 years past can come back to today. But tomorrow, it's a day forward and a day back. And those, again, it's a made-up rule. It means nothing, but for the story, it added drama, and it's kind of a cool rule. So the rules can be anything you want them to be. But again, I just think, why do you want them? You want them to make them for fun so they can be pushed against or explored. So I'm trying to think of any others specifically. Obviously, Time Cop, don't touch yourself. That's bad.
Well, no, I think this is
branch timelines from in-game.
Yeah, and I think this is
that
perfect.
could be bad.
To jump, I think we should just jump straight into homework, because I think this is one of the few times that homework needs to be explained a little bit more than others, just because of why we would suggest something and its particular brand of time travel. Because Tomorrow War is the one I enjoy because they established rules that I hadn't really heard of and just followed them. I was like, that's great. Look at you go. You just set them and stayed with them. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and then Looper. Have either of you watched that movie? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a fantastic time travel movie. It's so much fun. But they deal with time travel. They're having a conversation, and the younger version is like, well, how does time travel work? And the older version is like, I could explain it to you, but we'd just be here all day writing things on napkins. So they didn't ever explain it. They just tried to basically blow it off like, don't worry about it. Hot tub time machine. Don't worry about it. In game, they tried to explain it.
And they're very jokey about it. Yeah.
Which I loved because they go through all the different movies that have time travel. Obviously, Back to the Future is probably the touchstone most people are familiar with. Live, Die, Repeat, I think is an awesome time travel movie, which I actually think would port very well into a role-playing game. I think there's actually a video game called Dark Souls. I've never played it, but I think isn't that the one where you have to make a perfect run and every time you die, you reset?
Dark Souls is wonderful. I don't know if that's necessarily like lore-wise, I don't think.
Okay.
But I could be wrong because Dark Souls doesn't explain the lore to you as you go. So.
Okay. So the idea, though, is let's say you have a just completely deadly dungeon, a Tomb of Annihilation sort of thing, where is that the one in D&D, the one that kills everybody?
Yep.
That okay.
Rocks fall, everyone dies.
Yeah,
everyone dies, right? So maybe it's a situation where the characters go into there, and we know they're going to die, but anytime any character dies, they reset and they get to go again. So you get both the benefit of having these diabolical, deadly traps that are just kind of unfair to the players, and you get to see their characters mutilated, but they actually don't lose their characters. So they reset and they get to go again. And maybe sometimes they'll bypass a trap and they get the reward of being clever. And other times they get ground into meat pies through falling stuff, but then they get to try again. But maybe the world is still moving forward for everyone else. So they only got 3 days to get back to the village and save everyone. Every time they reset, they're going back in time, but time is still moving forward. So they can't do this indefinitely. I also think that kind of answers the question, like why people are always leaving these sort of like obscure clues. Like someone wrote, like it's like a riddle of all these different colors that kind of give the answer to a puzzle. Like who did that? It was some dude that was trapped in here for 1,000 lifetimes and they've lost their freaking mind. And so when they finally get out, they just have these vague recollections of everything they went through. So they couldn't just tell you, hey, don't step on the blue stone. It came out in this sort of weird, jumbled up way. And that helps explain all these like random clues that you might have. And just all the tropey stuff you get for dungeon crawls, like the little poem that tells you which way to go. It was from the person who did this 1 billion times and they've lost their mind over it.
That kind of a campaign is the one that I think that I would personally find to be the most daunting of a challenge to actually accomplish as a Live, Die, Repeat or Edge of Tomorrow, whatever the official title is, a Groundhog's Day, where you're like gone, like you're playing in a time loop that you're stuck in and you need to do something specific to get outside of it. I feel like that would be extremely difficult. So I guess I'm putting this out to say like this would be one that I would be worried about doing it, and I would love to see it done well, especially to even play in one, because I think the dangers you run into that type of a story is, well, you as a DM, you better know your stuff, because if you have an NPC that the characters are going to come across more than once because they're time looping, you got to know what that NPC says. Like you kind of have to have a script, like, and then as soon as like the characters go off that script, then you have them start acting differently. But like there is like every time you see that NPC, they better greet you in the same exact way, as long as you want it to have that theme of consistency throughout. Again, we all make mistakes, so if you mess up, you mess up. But like that's something as a DM I would want to make sure that I know what's happening. But then I think there's a danger that you run in playing through that time travel loop, is that you don't want it to become boring. And I think that there is a danger there. And so you have to be really creative in how you go about DMing for that style of game. Maybe you do not, on the 14th try, have the players role play through that interaction with the NPC the entire way through, because they're going to be sick of it by that point. You have either they're going to have to throw a wrench in the gears and be like, we push him off a cliff, we keep going because we don't care what he has to say, we've heard it 1,000 times now. Or you just as a DM say, you have the same conversation as you always do. Does it end anywhere different? And you don't need to go through every single thing over and over again. And that's a challenge. For me as a DM, I would find that to be a challenge to role play that kind of time travel story well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up Groundhog's Day, because that is absolutely, I can't believe I didn't go to that first.
How dare you?
All-time favorite movies. Palm Springs, very similar, but also a lot of fun.
Yes.
And I think those movies, would be kind of interesting because those movies are kind of about self-actualization, like becoming the best version of yourself, or Palm Springs case, like finding a partner, kind of finding love. I don't know, those are going to be mine for comedy, but in both of those movies, you still have that situation where you show or you tell more than show in some cases. Like you're supposed to show instead of tell, but you're right. We aren't with Bill Murray for 1,000 lifetimes, but we get the sense that he has gone through this loop maybe 1,000,000 times, because we have almost like a montage. Like he goes to learn to play piano. We see like 2 lessons, and then we cut to him playing beautifully in front of people. I think you're going to have to do the same thing.
DM that way. Yeah.
You
like
want
it's
to do
a
enough
movie.
to establish the baseline. And it's weird. So maybe you do the same scene like 2, maybe even 3 times, like verbatim, fully role played out. When the players are like, what is going on? Like, this is so weird. Once they've got to that point, I think then you start doing some montages. So like, okay, you do the same loop 14 more times. And then you say, okay, Sarah, what is one thing you try to do here to break the loop? Like, I punched the bartender. Okay, great. Doesn't change anything. Boop, you're back in the next loop. Okay, Tim, what did you try to do on the 8th loop? And I think you can do it like that, so people still get a chance to kind of, tell stories and role play and have their little, like, this is what my character would do to try to break the loop. But you still let them see that it's not going to work until they, solve whatever the MacGuffin problem is, without actually saying, okay, this is our 8th session of this game, but we're still in the very first hour of the world, because yes, I would get so tired. As a time travel lover, I would hate that if I did it too long. You're going to have to, figure out the best way to present this to your players so that they are having fun, because that's the key element here, without it getting monotonous.
Now, speaking of fun and speaking of not monotony because of chaos and Palm Springs brings to my mind a concept that should be fantastic for a time travel story campaign. Villain who can also time travel. Just like we kind of get in Palm Springs, you have this adversary who's also like, they're always coming for you. They're always coming for you. Like a villain who can time travel. We're talking about purposes. Maybe your team of adventurers aren't even the ones who initiated we need to time travel, but a villain did. And now it's like, oh gosh, we need to go stop him. We need to time travel back and stop him. Or her, like, I mean, that's right. Maybe the incident that sets this whole thing off is there's a villain who's going back to change things for not the better, but for the worst.
Well, I think that also, again, live, die, repeat, edge of tomorrow, all you need is kill. You need the names you want to go with. They get the power to time travel from the enemy. Like they inadvertently steal that power from the bad people, and then they use it to their own effect. I do like that. If you're going to come up with like, how is time travel possible? Make it the villain, and our characters are just caught in like a ripple, or maybe there are these agents of chaos that are coming back to change things. And again, classic D&D sort of style. The heroes are just in the right place at the right time, so they stop someone from getting killed that the villain sent back to be murdered, and they now have the ring, or the cloak, or the book, or the rod, whatever the case may be. They're all like, "What's this?" Boom! Now they're all transported, and now they're going through time like Bill and Ted. Another classic.
I think for me, for homework, it would be the Prisoner of Azkaban. You have the Time Turner. We've got a more fantasy setting. Now, honestly, like, it's not my favorite example of use of time travel, and it also creates a problem going forward in the movies where you could very much say, why don't they ever use this again? But like in this discussion, what it does accomplish is it accomplishes a time travel device, a time machine that is much more fantasy and magical if you are role playing in a fantasy type game. And so you can kind of look at that as inspiration. You could, of course, go from that and say, okay, well, it doesn't need to be like this hourglass, but it could be a magic portal, or like we said earlier, like a spell. But certainly you could look at that and kind of start to get your brain working on like, what is the device or just the way that time travel occurs within the game that I am running that works for the game that I am running.
Magicians, a TV show.
Yes.
Season. I absolutely love it. One of the things they did, which I think that there's multiple instances, but one that I really connected with, is 2 of the characters basically have an entire life together. And then at the end of that life, their consciousness is put back in their bodies before they left. So they have the memories of like 80 years together that they share, but no one else even knows that happened. That could be a very powerful moment. And also kind of lets you get away with some stuff. And, you can kind of be loosey-goosey and fun with it. But, you do this, you live an entire life, and now you have all those memories. It's not memories that are going to help you in this case, but the emotional weight of, you got married to this person, you had a relationship with this person, you had a child, and now you're back before any of that all happened. How does that weigh on you? And I think that show does that very well. It's one of my favorite episodes of any TV ever.
Yeah, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Also, you get that they rule a kingdom, which ties back to, again, the device you get. Like, Neal, you brought Feywild is the obvious.
Yep.
And also very prevalent with what is happening with Wizards of the Coast adventures right now. Like, Feywild, time travel, totally a device you could use for your games.
I think of Die, comic book series, where basically they had like been transported, like the people from the real world are transported into this game. They get themselves out and they end up showing back up 20, 30 years later. So now they're the adults who've lived adult lives in the real world forced back into the repercussions of their characters now having not existed in this world 20, 30 years later, and trying to figure out what's changed, what can we do to make things better.
I think the Feywild, you mentioned it. That's a very classic trope where you spend an hour in the Feywild and it's a year in the real world, and you can play with that forward, backward, left, right, any way you want to make things interesting. Flight of the Navigator. You may be familiar with that movie. Little boy gets basically kidnapped by a spaceship. He's returned the quote unquote next day, but unfortunately, because of speed of light travel, the next day is like 8 years in the future. So now his younger brother, his older brother, his parents, he thought he'd been kidnapped, that he's only aged 1 day. But the world has changed dramatically. And so you could think about that like in an RPG session. Maybe that explains how your characters can do what they can do, like why they've leveled up. They're now in a world full of, commoners, but they have these abilities. They've spent a year training, but they came back to 1 day from when they left, and they're completely different people. I keep throwing out random ideas rather than following what you guys are asking. I'm sorry, but I love this topic. And I'm just like, have all these ideas. Good. Like, what am I doing my next game?
Guidelines. Just guidelines.
The other one, and it's certainly used for the speed of plot, but like Rick and Morty has so many examples of time travel, time and space travel, of just like what that could potentially look at. I mean, it's certainly a well to mine from. I don't know that they necessarily follow any of the rules because it's so all over the place, but definitely finding aspects that work well for you. Because I mean, my favorite one is he gives Morty basically a redo button, and then he just to be mean and illustrate it, he's like, oh no, you basically killed every version that you reset to take their place and try again. And like figuring out what the repercussions of time travel are certainly another aspect.
Yeah, there's a plethora of things you can look to out there. And one of the great things about this is we talked about how some movies and some books and TV shows that explore time travel, they might establish a rule and then completely break it. It may come down to, for some, just terrible, lazy writing. Well, here's the thing. You could, even in those shows and those movies, there's still inspiration, and you can watch those and say, you know what, that was a good rule. You may not have followed it, but I can take that and I can use that in my story, and I can try my best, because again, this is a very daunting type of campaign to run. I can try my best to tell a better story where the rules are followed better. So wonderful topic. We could obviously talk about it for a long, long time.
And actually we have, but we've just come back to
the Well, that's what I was going to say is like, man, if only we had a time machine so that we didn't have other things that were impeding upon us, that we could just go, okay, well, 3-hour long episode, let's do it. However, unfortunately, I don't have one yet. So Michael, thank you so much for joining us to talk about time travel, to join us again on the Dungeon Masters block. We love having you here, and it's been way, way too long. Hopefully it won't be that long before we get you on again as a guest, because we love talking to you. For our listeners, if they want to check out everything you're doing, whether that's RPG Academy, whether that's Academy, or especially Action 12 Cinema, where can they go to follow you at, to get in touch with you, to see everything you're working on?
So pretty much Twitter is where I'm most active. That's at TheRpgAcademy. Pretty much everything I do, I post about there. I tweet about there. Obviously, if you listen to the podcast, they're always that plugs, that kind of stuff. There is a newsletter set up for Action 12 Cinema. I don't have it in front of me, but if you go to the website, it's there somewhere, so you can click on it, and you'll get notified when it does go to Kickstarter. But again, that'll be kind of late next year or mid of next year. And then Neal did it for me. But yeah, Farm to Fable. I kind of forget about that show, but I'm doing a Smallville TV show rewatch. Started doing this early in the pandemic. I just rewatched the entire 10 seasons of that show, and I'm like, this is actually kind of cool. I'm really liking this. So I started a show. Neal's been on a guest multiple times. Mitch, I don't know if you are into Smallville at all, but you'd be welcome anytime to be a guest as well. But each episode, I bring on a different guest, like a rotating cast of, so it's not the same 2 people or same 3 people every time. We just break down an episode, talk about it as if it's real. Like, what was Lana thinking? Or what do we think Lana's plan is here? And then we also call out all the idiocy, like, how many trucks have the Kents destroyed this week? And how many times has Lana had a concussion? Which is a lot, by the way. But it's a ton of fun. If you have any interest at all in Smallville, please check it out. It's called Farm to Fable. But the RPG Academy, you can find 99.9% of what I do.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Michael, and hopefully we'll have you back on sometime soon.
Anytime. A pleasure. Love you both.
We've already had you on several times. Time travel.
Exactly.
Oh.
We just want to thank Michael again for coming on and spending some time. And if you enjoyed this episode and want to tell us about how you've been adding time travel to your game, you can always email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And if you liked it, you can head over to iTunes or your podcatcher of choice, leave a review, and do all of those wonderful things. Of course, you can find us on Twitter at DMS_block, that's at DMsBlock, or on Facebook, where you can keep track of all the stuff we're doing. And as always, the Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other shows like Detentions and Dragons, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, DMnastics, and more. And as always, thank you for listening to the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of everyone else at the table. I'm DM Neal. Good night, good luck, and keep on Dungeon Mastering.